Okay, thank you, everyone. For anyone I have not met, my name is Bridget Diamond Welch. I'm the director of the Office of Research and Innovation for the School of Health Sciences. As you've probably become more familiar over time with what the office does for the School of Health Sciences, is we provide support of research and grant writing for faculty, staff, and students. So today we are giving another part 2 in our series on grant. Okay, you can admit people. Okay, good. Sorry. Part 2 in our series of Grant Writing 101. Nathaniel a few weeks back gave how to find grants, and we will put that YouTube video in the chat box below if that's something that you didn't get a chance to look at. We also, just to remind you, have a form that you can fill out if you are ready to search for grants that we can help you then find grants that work for you, and we'll put that in the chat box below as well. So today what we're going to start focusing on is we're going to pretend that you found a grant that you want to apply for and just give you some overview of what are your next steps. Now, this is going to be kind of a 100-foot overview because I can't delve into everything. So what I would like you to do today is pay particular attention to anything that you would like to know a lot more details on, because we can do a follow-up training, or I can talk to you one-on-one on any of those issues. And at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. Clara, who's also in the Office of Research and Innovation, will be watching that chat and can notify me when there's a question. I'm happy to pause at any time to answer any questions. You also are welcome, if you are so inclined, to camera on or mic on and just ask your question at any point. So I want to be as helpful as possible. Yeah, Matt.
So our, like Nate's presentation from last time, there were some good resources for where to find grants and so forth. Do you guys have that on ORI somewhere, like on your website, these videos and the PowerPoints and some of those things as resources, or should we just reach out each time?
So I'm hoping that we will develop that. We're working on developing a SharePoint. It's just a new technology for me. So until we get that figured out, if there is something that you want, just go ahead and email me or Nathaniel or Clara, and we'll give it to you. But yeah, we are working towards that, towards having some kind of repository so you can go back and get whatever you want. So great question. And once we have that repository, we'll make sure to share that out. If you are not, Tracy, Judd, and Matt, I'm going to pick on you because you're here. Are you all members of the ORI listserv?
Yep.
You know it.
Yep. All right. So anyone who's watching who is not, you should join the ORI listserv, because that is another place that we will send out these details as well. And we'll put that link in the chat. And then these will be on a YouTube channel, and we'll put those links in the description. I think that's what they call it. Those crazy kids today. Claire's laughing at me. She knows I don't. Okay. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, here are some of the learning outcomes that we're really trying to focus on. First, I'm going to talk you through the different USD offices that are available to you and what supports that they offer. Our different offices have some different roles, which can get confusing. But at any time, if you are confused, your response should be just let's reach out to Bridget and to Ori, because we can help untangle those for you. So if you don't remember what I tell you today, that's okay. We'll get you there. We're going to talk about 2 different kinds of grants and some basic differences between programmatic grants and research grants, and how that is going to impact your writing. We're going to talk about the grant timeline. So the writing of when you go through how you should approach getting the grant done, and then some important components or tips in writings. So again, remember, this is like a 100-foot view. So pay attention, take notes of what you want to learn more about. So first, I do want to talk about the 3 different USD offices that are here to support you. And these are the offices that you will need to engage when you are writing or working on submitting on a grant. When you are interested in a grant, one of your first stops should be your department and your department chair. Your chair or your director is going to be the person that you need to speak to about roles and expectations, payment structures, what kind of workload can you put on this grant, how much effort can you put on this grant, If you need any course release time to actually do the work of the grant, or summer pay, or if you have other expectations, or if you want students, like all of those questions, your department chair is going to be the first necessary, is going to be the necessary person you need to talk to see what is allowable within your department. Department chairs you can't just submit a grant saying you're going to have course release without having your department chair having approved that, because they have to be able to fill that course or make other arrangements, or maybe decide that they're not going to offer that course during that buyout or something, but the chair needs to be involved with that discussion. And the chair also, your chair needs to sign off on the grant before it actually will be routed through USD. So you don't want your chair surprised at what you're asking at the end of the day, okay? One of your first stops can also be ORI. So that's my office, the Office of Research and Innovation. We can help you with each step, as we're going to as we have been discussing, we'll continue discussing. We can help you find a grant. We can help you understand what the grant application is requiring. We can sit down and make a work plan with you about how ORI can support you and what kind of support you will need. And there's a lot of different things that we can do throughout the writing process to help you achieve your grant. So for example, one thing we will do is work with the business manager, Jeremy right now, on your budget approvals. So budgets are tricky things. There's a lot of rules and red tape that go into budgets. Some of those red tape are USD red tape. Some of those red tape belongs to the federal agency. If you're doing a federal grant or state agency that you're applying for the grant. Jeremy knows those backwards and forwards and can really help make sure that you have a strong grant budget going forward. ORI will can help you with the nuts and bolts of that budget, and then Jeremy will check it and make talk about any changes that need to happen on it to make it compliant. And ORI does need to approve, and so does Jeremy, of your application for it to go forward throughout the system. We are signers on for the dean's office on your grant. So you have your chair sign or your director sign, the dean's office sign, which is my office and Jeremy, and then in order to approve it. The other entity that has to be involved with your grant is ORSP. ORSP is the agency that has the authority to receive funds for the University of South Dakota. If you're working on a federal or state grant where that money is coming into where you'll be receiving pay or things like that, that grant is not coming to you, it comes to USD. And sometimes people misunderstand that. USD and the Office of Research is where that first flow point through is. And so if you are working on a grant, one of the things it's going to ask you for is your authorized representative. That is the VP of Research, who right now is Dan Engelbretson. He is the one that will actually, his office signs off on all grants and will be the ones that then submit the grant. And they submit the grant, yes, on your behalf, but it then it goes to the university. ORSP will also work with you on any subawards that you have or MOUs. Subawards are people who are doing a big portion of your project. They're responsible for really carrying forward a lot of the work. Sometimes you might be a subaward, and if you are a subaward, the process would be pretty much the same of what we talked about here. What a subaward is, it means that you are not the applicant agency. You are receiving a smaller grant from that applicant agency. That is something that ORSP handles the paperwork in terms of developing that subaward agreement. And so they will work with you very early on to send that paperwork to the other subawardee. Mostly this could be for you guys, this might be like a Vera, someone at a Vera, some faculty at a Vera or Sanford. It could be faculty at another university. So like if you are subawarding with someone at the University of North Dakota, University of North Dakota then is your subaward under your grant, and then University of North Dakota, again, that you're not subawarding with that person, you're subawarding with the entity of University of North Dakota. So the entity of USD has to work with the entity of UND in order for that award to go forward. And thankfully, ORSP handles most of that. You will work with your partner in terms of developing budgets and statement of work and the other things that ORSP will ask you for. But they will handle the actual university to university discussions, which is very, very useful. Some grants, particularly if we're talking about programmatic grants, we'll talk about in a minute. They might have an MOU, memorandum of understanding. These can be very informal and they can be super like contractual formal type of things. It just depends on what granting agency you're working on, and that's something and that's something we can look at. ORSP frequently is the one that will work on the MOUs, although it depends on some programmatic grants, you might be routing those, but that's something we can talk to early on through the process and figure out with ORSP how they want the MOU to flow. One interesting thing about ORSP is because they are the ones who actually are submitting your grant, they might see things in the application window that you can't see in the application itself. We just had a thing like this where it was an interesting like award that was like a sub award of another award, and when we couldn't see everything that was required because we couldn't get into the system. ORSP is the one that like creates the login and everything and goes into the system, so they can actually see what has to be uploaded and what that looks like. And so sometimes it's good to sit down with them or Zoom with them and have a conversation just to see what goes onto that system, goes in for that system. So the way to really think about these three offices is your department chair is really going to handle your workload agreement, or he can help you through every part of the process. ORSP is the one that's going to submit, right? And they're going to make sure that the university is in compliance, and they are going to be the ones that route those agreements. Questions, let me know. Okay, so we are going to talk about two different kinds of grants. There's an asterisk here because I'm going to be painting with a very broad brush. There are more than two different kinds of grants, but this is a helpful way to think of the differences between them. We're going to call the first kind programmatic and the second kind research. A programmatic grant tends to be the type of grant that what you're trying to do is you're developing a program. You're trying to develop something that doesn't exist and offer that kind of service or program. It is not a research or an evaluation grant. That is not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to provide some kind of service or some kind of program. For example, you might have read the newsletter about the HRSA grant that went to nursing. That grant was over $1 million grant. It was a programmatic grant. The purpose of that grant was to provide students with access to clinical experiences. It's not collecting data about those students. It's not collecting understanding of how that is effective or ineffective. It's not creating any kind of generalizable knowledge. It likely will not lead to any publications. The purpose is to develop that program. Some programmatic grants require evaluation as part of it, so that you have to evaluate the efforts, and it's written in there that you have to do it. Depends on the agency. They will frequently tell you how much of the budget is allowable to go towards evaluation, and it's usually a fraction of like a small fraction of the budget, because the overall purpose is that program. So some examples of those are Department of Labor, HRSA, different foundations, and SAMHSA often are more programmatic type of grants, although not always. As you can hear, it's a broad brush. The other kind is a research grant. A research grant is a grant that is like an NSF or NIH that you might think of more commonly. The purpose of a research grant is to apply some kind of methodological approach, a theory, a systematic research investigation, where the purpose of that at the end of the day is to create some kind of generalizable knowledge that you can apply to different areas. It should, they're going to expect you to publish out of it. You'll have a dissemination plan that talks about how you're going to publish, how you're going to let people know about what you found out, how you're going to spread information so that the world at large benefits from the findings that you had in your research study. These are the kinds that a lot of you, probably Jed and Matt, are more familiar with research, and Tracy, you're probably more familiar with the programmatic grants. They're both very important parts, very important types of grants that ORI can support you through. So what do you do first? Well, first you read the grant. I know this might seem dumb, but grants are very long and boring documents to read. So there is a lot of information in the grants. There's some key things that you should look for, at least the first time you read the grant. The first is whether or not USD is an eligible applicant. It will tell you, it will say something like, who are eligible applicants? And then I'll list who those are. It needs to say Institute of Higher Education can apply. Make sure it does not say that they cannot apply, for sure. If you're unsure whether or not USD is, and again, remember that the applicant here is USD, not you. If you're unclear whether or not USD is an eligible applicant, that's something you can reach out to ORI and we can check that for you. If USD is not an eligible applicant, it does not mean that you can't put together an application. What it means is that USD can't be the front applicant on it. It means that someone else actually has to be the PI or run this project. So for example, I have a Bureau of Justice Administration grant where it required that the applicant be either a criminal justice, like a law enforcement, or a state's attorney's type of office. So what we did is we partnered with Beetle County State's Attorney's Office to be the PI on the grant, and then wrote in another agency to do the grant management for that group in order to be able to apply for that grant. And then USD had the research component under that. So there are ways still to apply if it's something you can find a partner to work on. The next thing to think about is, what is the core of what they're trying to fund? It will tell you in detail what it's trying to fund. Something to keep in mind is most, particularly federal grants, are going to be based on past legislation that has been passed to do something in particular. There's going to be a call that they're going to provide particular types of money to fit particular needs. State things are the same way. They're going to have particular types of things that they have to fund, and that's within their within the legislation, that this is what they have to fund. Foundations are not going to be legislated, but they are going to have a very strong mission statement, and they might have a strategic plan, and they're going to fund within that plan. You want to make sure that what you're applying speaks specifically to the core of what they're trying to fund. If you, and this is why when you hear people talk about NSF grants or NIH grants or even CDC grants, that they say, did you reach out to the program manager? What they mean there is, they said, what they're asking you is, did you reach out and email the people at NIH and say, I saw this grant, this is the thing I want to do. Do I fit within your umbrella agency? And they can tell you yes or no, because they're only going to pick you up and fund you if you speak to that core of what they're trying to do. You want to note what the grant period is and what the funding amount is. You might see a grant is worth $1 million, but then you find out that the funding period is 6 years. So it's $1 million over 6 years. That's going to indicate different level of work than if it's $1 million over 1 year. So you want to pay attention to what that period is and the funding amount. A big important thing to pay attention to is whether or not they require match funding. Match is basically, it can be a complete match or a partial match, but that is that University of South Dakota is going to have to pony up a particular amount of money in order to match the federal dollars that you are requesting, or state dollars, or whatever foundation dollars that you're asking for. If it requires match, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but what it does mean is that we have to get the dean in the conversation as soon as possible. Let the dean know that there's match that is coming, see whether or not they think that she thinks it's possible, and then we need to start thinking thinking through what that match might look like. And there's some creative ways of making match that we can talk about if your grant does have match, but it's conversations you want to start ASAP. Are there any other budget requirements? That will be listed too. For example, I talked already about a specific amount of money that can go towards evaluation. Other grants might say you have to spend a particular amount of money funding students, right, to a particular amount, or you have to have an advocacy organization that has to be at a particular amount. So just making sure that you know where your money has to go is an important step. Are there any required partnerships? Partnerships are going to be one of the key things we're going to talk about today. Make sure if the grant says you have to have a particular agency or type of agency on board, make sure they're on board. You need to know that early on. You need to start those conversations. Another thing to think about is how many pages are allowed. I will say this again, or this is the pro tip. If you are not struggling to delete from your grants to meet the page limit, you wrote your grant wrong. You should always need to cut, trying to figure out what you absolutely need to get to that page limit. And some grants have weird page limits, like HRSA will say that you can only have 60 pages, but only 5 pages of this document count and only 2 pages of this document count. And the last thing you want to do is turn in 61 pages and have your grant not reviewed. So you just need to make sure that you're meeting that both from a writing standpoint and then also from making sure that you are going to be evaluated. NSF and NIH are interesting grants because they put out their call for grants, but then they also have additional grant guidelines that are separate, and they'll tell you that basically there's these standing grant documents that they have about guidelines about what you need to write, and then what's in the RFP is in addition to that. And so you actually have to use both sources, which I have never really enjoyed. I like having all my rules in one place, but there you go, that's what it is. Making sure that you know where all the guidelines are for grants. All right, so what are your steps for applying for funding? What are your timeline? The first thing when you know you have a grant that you want to apply for is you're going to start the machine, right? So you should notify me. You should notify your contracting agency. For example, I'm going to go with this in order. You should notify me. We can work together. If you don't know how to notify ORSP, what they need to know, I can help you get to know that. ORSP will start what's called your CAIUS, which is your routing system through USD. And they will also help you start your subaward paperwork if you have that. If you have partners, you should let them know or notify them and start those conversations. If it's NIH or NSF, some other agencies like that, or that otherwise like PCORI, there's like PCORI is one, and there's some other ones. I was just looking at one and I don't remember there was a foundation I was looking at that said step 1 is to talk to us. So make sure you notify them and have those conversations. If it's not like those kind of organizations, frequently they'll put out a webinar about the grant that you should put on your schedule and make sure you go to. So for example, with HRSA, generally you're not going to reach out to HRSA to ask questions, but they will have a webinar that you will go to and you can ask questions at. So that should get into your schedule. And also if you let me know, it's something that Ori can see if we can get into our schedule so we can all go together and we can support you. After you start the machine, you should start writing your grant. Ori can assist with this and we can talk through. We do everything from helping you know what goes into your grant. I can read and give you feedback on your grants, get steps as many times as you need that I can potentially do, but we can set that up early on about how many times or what kind of assistance you need there. You will also then work with ORSP for your subawards and possibly any MOU that you might have. So you're writing, and about 2 weeks out, you want to get your budget draft to Ori. This is a necessity. You must get this budget draft to us so we can get it to Jeremy. You can also, if we agreed on you wanted support, then any other drafts should be at Ori at least by this point. Even if it's not a complete draft wherever you are, we should be looking at it. in other drafts, you're going to have more than your narrative. Sometimes there's a lot of extra little pieces. So just making sure that we have all those and you have all the information you need for those other pieces will be a conversation we can have. Then we'll get those back to you and you can make edits. Some will be optional edits. Some will be required edits. Basically edits to your budget from Jeremy are basically usually going to be required. Like if you're paying someone too much or not enough, or you didn't put in benefits or something like that, he's very helpful and will help you through what those steps are. And then apply. ORSP says 2 business days before the due date, they should have your application. These timelines are all a little wibbly wobbly, meaning that sometimes I have applications to ORSP very, very shortly before it's actually due. The key here is communication. If you're communicating with me and you're communicating with Jeremy and you're communicating with ORSP, we're all going to bend over backwards to do what needs to get done in order for your grant to get submitted. We all are on the same team in terms of that, and we want you to be successful. So just making sure that you're communicating with us throughout will ensure that there's some room and wiggle room in these timelines. All right, so some important things to consider with your grant. There are 2 headaches that I always have with each and every grant. The first is going to be your budget, and the second is going to be partnerships. All of those are the things that are going to be difficult. They're going to throw up roadblocks, and that's really because they both rely on outside partners. So your budget is going to generally have, if you have outside partners, it's going to have those outside partners in your budget who have to provide you information in order for it to get into your budget. So you're going to be reliant on someone else to provide you information, and that can be difficult. They also have you might have an MOU, which are crazy fun to try to get done in a timely manner. I just did one last spring that had something like 45 signatories on it, and it was something else. And there's some rules about how you have to do that. So getting everything signed and in place. The most recent budget or the most recent grant we did, we needed 4 external partners. We had letters from 3, and the 4th one, I'm in that waiting room somehow. Okay. So, and then the 4th letter came in the day after, the budget got turned in. So the grant got turned in. So budget and partners are always going to be the things that you need to be working on. You need to be on them as soon as possible. All right. So then when you're writing itself, when you're writing the narrative, there's really 3 things that I think are 3 ways to summarize what granting agencies want to hear from you. They want to know what your need is. They want to know your plan for meeting that need. And then they are wondering, why you? Why are you the person we should fund? These are the 3 main questions. I mean, within here, you have what, where, why, when, and how. Like they're all a part of that. But these are the central things. They want to know what you need, how big of a need it is that your state or your agency has for this grant thing. Like how fundamentally huge can this work be, right? Or how unique and new and innovative is your research project, right? They want to know that. Then they want to know how you're going to accomplish it. Can you accomplish what you're saying? Is it sustainable? Are your methods correct? And then finally, why should they trust you? Why should they give you this money, all this money to do this thing? Why are you the right person or the right team for that job? So those are the core. And there we go. So I'm going to talk about those 3 things for both kinds of grants. First, I'll talk about programmatic for each, or for one, and then I'll talk about research for that same one. So the first is the need, programmatic. So first, does it fit within the scope of the RFP? RFP is what we're saying, this request for proposal, the document that you put out, the grant call, right? I'm just going to call it the RFP. There's a lot of names for it. They say what they want to fund. Do you fit it? Do you fit it perfectly? They're going to be more likely to fund you the better you fit that. Second, can you illustrate that the area that you're serving has that need using data and information? for the geography or your population being affected. And we're going to talk in a minute about the theory of change as a way of showing this and a way of illustrating this project. So what you want to do is you want to get some basic data. Here are some frequent data points that I use when writing a grant. Department of Health has a thing called vulnerability assessment for each county across South Dakota, which has things about opioid use and food deserts, and it just has a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of statistics that are very useful that you can use to pull on to talk about your geography. Medical shortest areas, this is where we don't have physicians, we don't have other medical services, dental, mental health. Where are those shortages in the state? And then workforce development website is where you can get your labor statistics, like how many nurses do we need, how many OTs, PTs, what is the projected, how many do we have now, and what is the projected need that we have in the future. You can find that all through workforce development. You can also find it through asking Ori, because we're really good at finding these statistics and making fun little maps that you can throw in your proposal, because everyone likes a good map. My pro tip here is when you're writing a programmatic grant is to use the words of the grant back to the grant in the order in which it appears in the grant. I always imagine, you can do the same thing with faculty. You have a stack of grants like this high, right? Or a stack of papers this high. How can I make it as easy as possible for that person who's grading my grant to give me a perfect score? Well, the way to do that is to indicate exactly to them about when I'm talking what's in their rubric, right? So I do that by following the grant exactly, talking about exactly where it says first you need to talk about the need. Well, then the first thing I would do is say the need in this geographic area, and I would bold that. So when they're grading and it says, do they illustrate the need in geographic area, on their rubric, they know exactly where they are, right? And they can map that. So use the words back. I always bold it instead of using quotation marks because it really pulls them in. But as you can see, these examples, I pulled these out of grants I've written. And the bold is where it is the words from the grant. In terms of research, it's very similar. First, does what you want to do respond to the RFP or fit within a particular agency? So if you're working with NIH or NSF, they're going to have an umbrella grant, and then you'll be funded within particular sections. And same thing with actually the Department of Defense. They'll have little organizations that you're funded within or underneath that you'll then be applying to. And so you need to meet the call of one of those, and how you can find that out is by emailing them and saying, hey, these are my aims. This is what I wanted to do. There's also this thing that a lot of people don't know about. It's called NIH Matchmaker. And what the NIH Matchmaker is you go in, and what you're going to do is you're going to write out your aims. Like you're basically going to write your abstract, and then you're going to go in and you're going to paste it in to here. And then it's going to tell you what it's funded before and who's funded it, and like where you're likely to be successful in your funding. So if you write your aims out, that's something that you can look at. And I unfortunately lost my PowerPoint. Here we go. Sorry about that. So NIH Matchmaker is something that you might want to think about. If you have an idea, you can put it in there and see what kind of sub-agency it's suggesting for you. And I'll tell you like other things that are like yours and what they were funded, what calls they were funded under, and what other mechanisms, so you can look through that. They're going to also see whether or not what you are saying that you want to do is something that is needed, right? So this is like in literature when you're talking about the lacuna or the hole. This is the question that's not been asked or not been properly asked or hasn't been fully asked. You're going to have to illustrate to them that there's a need for this research. This is the same thing you do with an academic paper in your introduction that really says, this is the reason why you should publish my work, or this is why it's new. This is why it's something that's of contribution. You need to use basic language. And this is something that I struggle back and forth with every time I review someone's grant. You have to remember that the people who are reviewing you aren't necessarily in PT or OT or work with child maltreatment specifically might not have the knowledge that you have. So you need to make sure that what you're writing, they're smart people. They're, you know, they have their specialties in the general area. So you don't have to write down to an 8th grade level, but you do need to be able to communicate across disciplines, which is why I'm a really good reviewer for you, because I am a sociologist. Like, I don't know a lot of what you guys talk about. So if I don't understand it, I can tell you this is where you need to clarify. And if I don't understand it, you can bet that some reviewer might not as well. Okay, so then I wanted to show you this theory of change document. A theory of change is a really easy way. This is really great for programmatic grants specifically. Where you want to do is start with what you're trying to do with the grant. It's the result statement, like what are you trying to achieve? Then you want to go through and say, well, what are the things that keep us from achieving this? Right? And then over here, you can say, well, if these are the things that are keeping, what can we do about that? And that's where you're going to come up with your strategy, your objectives, and your activities over here that you're going to report in your grant. And I'm happy to do another session where we talk about using theories of changes. If that's something that's useful for people who want programmatic grants. I can tell you a theory of change. This theory of change is 2/3 of the grant that for most programmatic grants. So the 2/3 are like, what is your problem and what should we do about it? Those are 2 of the big sections. They might call it something else, but that's really what those sections are. And then the 3rd section is going to be the who are you. This is 2 of the 3. This is what do you want to do and why? Why is it a problem? And then it's what are you going to do about it? Right? Those are those 3 sections. All right. So then you need to come up with a plan. So they want to know what your plan is. For programmatic, that's your goals and objectives. Frequently now they're asking for SMARTY. You might have heard of SMART goals. Now they're asking for SMARTY goals. So if that's new lingo for you, I put it up here. But those are goals that are specific, measurable, action-oriented, relevant, time-bound, and then they added inclusive and equitable to those goals. But basically a SMART goal is really saying that by the end of year 1, we will have brought 15 new nurses into the University of South Dakota to become a part of this program with a specific focus on increasing enrollment of Native students by 5%, right? So you can see 15, it's a number, you can measure that, increase by 5%, you can measure that. It's time bound, I said within year 1, action oriented, this is what we're doing, right? Relevant, I always think is a dumb one because if it's in there, it's got to be relevant, but whatever, they put it in order to make it spell smart probably. Right, so it hits all of those things. That's what a SMARTY goal is. A way that I like to make goals is through logic modeling. So the first thing I will do is I will do my theory of change. That will give me these strategies. Those strategies become my objectives. And then those objectives will form my logic model. And so we could also do a whole training on how to do a logic model and what that looks like. And I'd be happy to lead that. Logic models for a very long period were my life. But I still also put things in logic models because they fit how I think about things. And I'm very happy to logic model with you on a Saturday afternoon, or actually let's make it a weekday, but still I will happily logic model away with you. So logic modeling can give you those, can help you form what your plan is. And for me, taking ideas and putting it into a logic model and then writing, those are processes I do. And then I edit as I go back and forth to make sure that they match, because there's something about writing narrative that makes sure that you get the story straight. And there's something about the logic model that makes sure that everything is flowing in a way that is cohesive. And so together they tell a good story. Some grants are going to require a work plan. I don't have an example work plan for you, but if that's something you want to do, we can also work on work planning. But that's like what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, who's going to do it, getting the specifics. HRSA tends to require work plans as part of their grants. They're not my favorite thing, but if you can do if you know how to do a logic model, then it's just like upping the logic model to the next step is a work plan. You also need to figure out whether you have the partnerships you need in order to achieve your goal. If there's something you can't do or should not be doing because it's not what you're good at, is who can you bring in to partner with you in order to achieve that thing? Sometimes they're required partners, and other times it's just a really good idea to bring in that outside entity. Frequently with programmatic grants, more and more they're moving towards evaluation plans. In fact, CPCM is a great example of an organization that has a lot of programmatic grants, including some OVW grants, who now is moving towards having an evaluation plan that they actually never see whether or not you did your evaluation plan, but they're requiring it. So you can do an evaluation plan, you're required to do it. They actually don't check you on it, but you're required to do it, which always makes me giggle. But if you do a logic model, the purple and the blue, those areas become the basis for your evaluation plan. So also, if you're interested in how to do evaluations, knowing how to do a logic model would be a very good first step. And we could talk about the relationship between logic models and evaluation plans, but they really should go hand in hand. So frequently they'll require you to do an evaluation plan. We have faculty, staff, and the staff at ORI can support evaluations. MPH is very good at, they do a lot of evaluations. So if you do require an evaluation on your grant that you don't want to do or don't have the capacity to do, that's something else you can come to ORI and we can support you with. Meaning that you actually wouldn't write your evaluation plan, you would bring in someone who you're going to pay to do it to write that evaluation plan for you. Okay, so then for research, instead of talking about goals and objectives, normally they're going to talk about aims, what your aims are, what you're going to try to accomplish. You're going to want to talk, if you're using human subjects, not everyone will, you are going to want to think very carefully through incentive plans. What are you going to pay? How much are you going to pay? What is that going to look like? There's a lot of complicated budget stuff that goes with incentive plans. And then if you're going to recruit people, where are you going to recruit them from, and what are those relationships? That's something else that ORI can help you with, is if you need a recruitment, a site partnership to recruit participants, that's frequently something that we can help you connect with. And then, of course, you're going to write out your methodology and your analysis plans, just like you would in the front part of a paper. Like, these are the methods that you are proposing to do. This is why they're strong methods and appropriate for this. And this is the evidence that you should use this methodology. And then this is how we're going to analyze the data. Finally, I will say for both of these, your plan must be perfectly speak to your budget. Okay. At the end of the day, anyone who knows how to read a grant should be able to look at your budget and have a pretty darn good idea of what you're doing without reading your narrative at all. They have to speak to each other one-to-one. If they don't, you wrote one or the other wrong. And if it's not showing up in your budget, you're going to lose points. If it's in your narrative and vice versa, people are going to get very confused. And they're also going to look to see whether or not you are providing enough incentives or enough budget in order for the work to get done. So if you have a huge project and you come on and say, I'm going to do all this for 2% of my time, that's not going to review very well. They're going to say that you don't have enough time that you are giving to this project in order to accomplish it. So that's something else that your budget should do. Okay. So your plan, your budget is part of it. Your budget is your grant and numbers, like I said. When you write your budget, you're likely going to have to put it in a particular format for the granting agency. You also have to use the ORSP provided Excel template. That is just what we need internally, and it's going to be added to your Cayuse. They're going to want to see that, so make sure that you're using that. The budget template is also great because it's going to automatically figure out your benefits and things like that. And apply them correctly based on the year, and also apply raises and things like that. So there's some good reasons to use that Excel. I can help you, my office can help you put your budget into Excel, and then Jeremy will check it because I make mistakes. Jeremy will catch any mistakes and help you with it. You also have to question the indirect rates. What indirect rate are you at? USD on this budget template has indirect rates. I don't think, yeah, it's not going to let me click on it, but it's something like if it's, if you have a research project that is going to be off campus, so like a lot of my projects are in the community where the research is taking place, then your indirect rate is going to be 26%. If it is on campus, I want to say it's 47%. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but if we have that Excel spreadsheet, it's down here in the corner. It lists what the indirect rates are. You also want to check if you have a question about what your indirect rate should be, that's something you can ask Ori about, or you can ask ORSP, either way. Also, you need to make sure that your grant call does not limit your indirects. Some granting agencies limit indirects. For example, HRSA often says, I think 8%, SAMHSA says 8%. So they limit it, and then the University of South Dakota will comply with that if they say it's a lower rate. So if it's documented that there's a lower rate, that's the rate that you want to use. And then you're going to have to document it to ORSP that it is indeed that rate. So you just want to make sure to check your RFP, your proposal to see, and that is something we can support you with as well. Interestingly, NIH, their indirect rates usually are on top of your budget. So they'll say that the grant is $400K. That means you can spend $400K of actual program costs, and that indirect rates are on top of that. So then your grant can be whatever 20, I'm not going to math right, but it's going to be 490 or whatever K at the end of the day, rather than other grants where indirect rates are a part of the umbrella, right? And so that are how much they say the grant's worth. So you're just going to have to check on those indirect rates with ORSP or with Ori, and we can support you. So then why you? Why you? Why should they give you this money? Well, for programmatic grants, really what you're doing is you're going to make the case that you have the team in place that is needed in order to deliver the program that you promised. We are awesome in these particular ways. These are the things that we can do. Here are the supports that we have. And we have these partnerships. And together we make this huge, great group that can actually fully develop and provide what we say we were going to do. This is illustrated through our MOU that is signed or through letters of support, depending on what they ask for. Ori again can help you with how to write letters of support and what those should look like for your grants. You also want to illustrate your partnership is adequately supported in the budget, and that your partners agree to the budget that has been set aside for them. You also want to write about how who's going to do what and how that fits within their strengths. And basically you're making the case that the people doing the job are the right people for the job. Research, it's very similar. It's very important with research usually to have a very strong PI. Usually a lot of times someone that may have had previous grants, or if not had previous grants, is published widely in an area. If this is not you, a great first step is to find a strong PI and work with them on their grants until then you become that strong PI, and then you can PI your own grants. But that shouldn't keep you from applying for grants. It's just something to consider. Finally, further, just like with programmatic grants, usually when you're doing a grant, you're not going it alone. You have a team. So your team together, do you have strong CVs? And then have you worked together before? They're going to care about that. We've all been in teams where the work does not go well, right? So if you've worked together before, you illustrate that you're capable of working together. They really like to see that. That's why we keep pushing the development of those working groups, right? So we're hoping what those working groups will do is over time start publishing together, and then they can start getting grants together because they will have that experience of working together. Again, you have any partnerships that you need, you have the letters of support that show those partnerships. That commitment from those other agencies is seen in the budget. And with research grants, frequently what they're going to ask you to do is also talk about the University of South Dakota, and what kind of support systems we have in place in order to support you. So that's when you would write documents about, we have the Office of Research and Innovation, and this is what they do. And we have the Office of Research and Sponsored Projects, and this is what they do. Here are the people that we have that can really support it. These are the offices we have. And some organizations like NIH and NSF want to know how big your office is and whether or not you have computers and file cabinet, like weird stuff, because I think they're mostly geared towards lab science, but you still have to fill those things out, but they're overall trying to figure out whether or not you have the support you need to deliver on what you're promising. Partnerships are key. This is a grant I wrote for the Compass Center last spring. It was funded. But you can see here's the list of all the agencies that came on this grant in order for this project to be successful. There were a lot of people and a lot of agencies across South Dakota that came on and promised time, either in kind, which means that they would basically donate or do the work as part of their workload, or had a piece of the budget that was illustrated, and all that was laid out in the MOU that provided this entire partnership together. And another thing we have is Clara here, who made this graphic. Want to call her out, right? So reading grants, they like pictures, they like graphics. So if you can make things look nice, that helps. And Clara can help you with that. So I had her made this graphic for me because I think it illustrates those partnerships a lot better than a table or a list would. As I said earlier, two problem areas are budget and partners. And as you can see here, financial support for partners, this is where they collide. But you need to know that you need to be in conversations with these partners early. Sometimes agencies want to come on board, but they may need to, like if you partner with someone lower at Department of Health, they're going to have to get approvals all the way up in order to be able to give you a letter of support. Or if you want to work with a tribal agency, you might have to go to the tribe. You might have to go to tribal council to get approval in order to submit your grant. We recently had a grant where we needed to do that. So you need to know who these partners are and approach them early so we can achieve that. All right, I will stop talking. And I see we have a question, do we? No, we don't. That was Clara. All right, what questions do we have? There was a lot of information. I feel like I talked very quickly. Go ahead, Matt.
No, it's not a question. I just appreciate you putting this all together and having it available for me to reference later as well. I think the biggest thing I got away from it was the matchmaker, and try to use that to the NIH to help me try to maybe find some opportunities. So,
What did you say? Did you say you liked matchmaker?
No, I'm interested to learn more about that. I thought that was one of the good resources I picked up from this, but I don't have any specific questions right now. Thanks.
Oh no, that's great. And we're going to send out a survey. It's very short. If you could fill that out and just indicate in there that you'd like to learn more about matchmaker. I have a colleague who has more NIH grants than you can shake a stick at, who has agreed that she can provide us with a training. And so if that's something that people want to have interest in, or have interest in learning more about specific agencies like NIH or NSF or whatever, or like NIH matchmaker, that is something we definitely can do. So just let us know in there, and here is appreciated too. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have one question. So if you are applying for a grant where you're using human subjects and have to work with the IRB, at what point should you be contacting IRB and starting to work on getting approval for that?
Thanks. That's a great question. I would say I personally have never seen a grant where you have to get human subjects approval prior to submitting the grant. That's something that you get on the back end. However, you do need to be very careful when writing a research grant if you're using human subject, or you're doing human subject research, that you very carefully think through what you're going to be doing. And then some agencies require you to do like this whole incentive plan, and they require you to do, let's see, there's incentive plans. Incentive plans are how are you going to pay, what that looks like, and you have to justify that payment. And they want to know your processes for payment. So that's something that we can work with you in order to complete, but it requires a lot of thought and making sure you know or talk to people who know USD rules about payment to figure it out. And then they're going to have what's called a privacy certificate, or they might have a certificate of confidentiality. Those are going to all require information about what you plan to do for your grant. And they, like with the privacy certificate, it's a legal document. It's about how you are actually going to legally be protecting these individuals to the extent that it's protecting you from being subpoenaed in court in order to testify. And it's also protecting anything your people tell you from them getting prosecuted. Because South Dakota, we have a law, it's called misprisonization. What that means is if someone tells you about a felony and you do not report the felony, you can actually be brought up on charges yourself. And so as a researcher, that can be a problem. But if you have a certificate of confidentiality or you have a privacy certificate, that adds a layer of protection to you. And it also protects your research subjects, because then anything they tell you cannot be used against them, cannot be subpoenaed and used against them. And that's a federal law on the privacy certificate. So that didn't fully, I mean, that went way more beyond what your question was, but you don't have to go to IRB, but you do need to think through this. So you could always meet with IRB and ask them questions beforehand to make sure that you're giving the strongest proposal as you possibly can for how you're going to be protecting your participants, because you're definitely going to be graded on that when you're getting reviewed. Are there other questions? Yeah, Tracy.
Bridget, thank you. That was really helpful, and that is really relevant to the work we do and if we did research with this particular topic area. But kind of shifting focus a bit, I've been seeing various opportunities for dissertation supporting opportunities or grants that have come through recently. So as a student and a staff member at USD, I'm just curious if you were to apply for the dissertation type of opportunities, would that typically go through the department which your advisor is within? If that's different than the department you possibly work for, I'm sure there's a ton of overlap, and likely we might be partners on the project, but I've just been curious kind of about that and like which department you'd actually apply through. I'm
willing. So what we would do is if you find one, and as I would read it with you and make sure that we did this correctly, but I would be willing to bet that it would be with your chair, the chair of your committee, because they're going to be the one most directly involved in supervision and also may need to have access to the data and are going to be and they will be the one on record as having control. Like when you apply as a student for human subjects, you don't apply, your advisor applies, like your professor applies, right? So what that means is that they're the ones actually culpable for the work that you're doing. And so I would say that the same kind of thought process would lead me to suspect that it would be your faculty member that would be the one that would be most directly involved with your research, and therefore the one that you would be applying with or through. Does that make sense, Tracy? Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what I was kind of leaning towards or thinking myself, but yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And that would be a great conversation to have with Jeremy too, because there's going to be some interesting things about time and share, like cost share, and like there's just going to be some money things that we'll need to think through. But I know we'll be able to do it. So just let us know as soon as you have a call that you want to respond to. We'll read through it and we can start figuring all that out.
Thank you.
So I hope that this was a lot. I hope it was a helpful overview. I hope that no one leaves here feeling overwhelmed, because I think the message that I would like you to leave with today is that even if it seems overwhelming, you have Ori, you're no longer alone. We're here to go through all of this with you. We've been through it so many times now. We know what we're doing. And if we don't know what we're doing, more importantly, we know who to ask to figure out what the hell to do. And also then you don't have to waste your time trying to figure out the people to ask. That's a time saver too. So we are here to support you. The earlier you get us involved, the better we can be there for you every step of the way. So I hope to hear from all of you soon that you're applying for grants. I didn't just think myself, that's someone else who's posing as me.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very